Hello everyone, welcome back to Castle Goring, chatting with Lady C. Hello Georgie, how are you today?
I'm very well, thank you, Leo. And you?
I'm great, thank you very much.
Good.
Okay, great.
Good.
Should we go with the first question?
No, I think we should go with the tense.
Well, this is 100 and who knows which one. Yes. Okay, the first question is, have you ever watched The Crown TV
Yes.
series? And if so, is The Crown factual or fictitious?
I watched the first two series of The Crown. I thought Claire Foy was very good as the Queen. I'm afraid I haven't stretched to watching any of the others. It's not factual. It's very fictitious. It plays terribly with the truth. It panders to all sorts of popular myths and misconceptions, some of which I think are dangerous if you're a monarchist, although I get the fact that insofar as the public is concerned, it's interesting because it's historical entertainment. But if you care about history, which I do, it's so full of howlers, some of which are really quite unnecessary, and some of which pander to a very populistic and denigratory view of the royal family. And while I'm always happy to denigrate anybody who deserves it, I'm equally not happy to denigrate people who don't. So no, I haven't bothered to look at the third or the fourth, and I'm not going to look at any of the others. At least I have no plans to, because really I'd much rather read history books than look at rubbish on television that is entertainment and is supposed to be historical and isn't. Rather than that, I look at something like the Medici, which is admittedly a little bit historically inaccurate at times, but since they're covering several centuries of activity in a few episodes, so to speak, it makes sense, and that was really brilliantly done. But The Crown, no, sorry. Next question.
No. So, have you thought presenting The Crown as a factual?
What do you mean? That I present a series on The Crown?
Yes, as factual.
No, I haven't thought of it, Leo. It's a brilliant idea. Thank you very much. Maybe I should discuss it with my agent.
Yes, you should.
You think so?
Yes.
Well, at least people would get the truth. So,
Yes.
okay, now, really, next question. Thank you, Leo, by the way.
So our next question is, what do you think Jessica Mulroney planning expose of Meghan and their Canadian days together?
Well, I think it would be wonderfully entertaining if she did it.
Yes.
I can see the merits of her doing it, and I can see the demerits of her doing it from her personal point of view. But, you know, sometimes if people betray you enough, because, I mean, there's absolutely no doubt that Meghan Markle wouldn't be where she is now had she not attached herself to and befriended Jessica Mulroney, who has proven to be a wonderful friend to her and who got herself in a spot of bother. But my understanding of friendship has always been that you do not dump friends when they are in need, because if you do so, you are not a friend indeed. And let's see what happens. I think it would be very entertaining. I certainly would be delighted to introduce Jessica Mulroney to my publishers. I might even edit the book.
Yes.
Actually, I wouldn't, because I'm not an editor, but still. But, you know, I certainly would be entranced if she did it. Next question, my dear.
So next question is it true that Queen Victoria actually had her children to a Rothschild and not Prince Albert? And Gregory Hallett, the fake King John III, says that the British royals have not right to the throne, and that the Queen's father was Winston Churchill. So, what do you think
my
about
dear,
this?
as soon as we finish this, may I ask you to immediately hop on the phone
Yes.
and book a first-class cabin for me to go to Timbuktu on the Pig Airline, and maybe possibly it could also have stewards who are cows, and maybe the pilot can be a goat. I mean, I've never heard such balderdash in my life. The Queen's father was Winston Churchill, as they used to say in New York when I was at school there, I gewalt geschrien, which means a yell and a shriek to God. So that's right. As for that man, whoever his name is, insofar as I'm aware, there was only ever one King John in England. So how he's managed to become King John III would be quite interesting, because, I mean, there is some dispute as to whether the present royal family has the best right to the throne, but they are in possession of the throne. And my understanding is that the person who actually has the best right to the throne in terms of inheritance at the moment, presuming that the Stuarts had the absolute right to the throne, would be the Duke in Bavaria. So I think I rest my case there. I think the whole thing's hogwash and codswallop. Next question, please.
So I want to ask you one question, what was asked, but I know that you are maybe not interested in this one, but I will be naughty again to ask.
Good.
So don't throw me through the window.
No, I'll get Mickey to throw you through the window.
Okay, so the question is, did you ever go to Studio 54 in its heyday? And if so, what was it like?
I actually never went to Studio 54 at all.
Okay. What was the Studio 54?
Oh, Studio 54 was a very famous nightclub.
Okay.
And it was, you know, Andy Warhol used to be there quite a lot, Bianca Jagger. I ran across Bianca Jagger in Tramp.
Yes.
When she was always there with what was his name? Ryan O'Neill, who was in London making Barry Lyndon with Marissa Berenson. Well, they were in Ireland a lot of the time, but they were in England a lot of the time. But Studio 54, no. I had such a terrible time in New York during my marriage that after I took back my sister-in-law Jeannie's pictures in, I think it was 1976, December 76, if I'm not mistaken, I think it was December 1976. I didn't go back to New York. It might have been 78 was the last time I went. Anyway, I didn't go to New York for 9 years. That was the heyday of Studio 54. Also, it has to be said, I was never a groupie, and I was never interested in being a part of a group. I was always, you know, I used to go to Annabelle's a lot, Tramp occasionally, very occasionally Monkbridge. When I was younger in New York, I used to go to Le Club, Numero Uno, but I was not a part of any pack. I've never been a pack animal, which doesn't mean that I haven't had circles of friends. But, you know, Studio 54 was very pack animalish, and they were all very sort of high profile pack animals like Bianca Jagger, Andy Warhol. I know one or two people who did go, whose names will be unmentioned, because they wouldn't thank me for revealing their youthful indiscretions, especially as how one or two of them actually hold rather eminent positions nowadays. But it was never my scene. Also, it was very druggy, and I was never interested in drugs. Ever, ever.
So it was
ever.
not a good place to go out.
Oh, it was fantastic. Yeah. I mean, people loved it, and it was supposed to be fabulous. But its heyday was when I was not in New York. I purposely didn't go to New York for 9 years because it revived such disagreeable memories. And it was only after I went into therapy and started to unload myself of all my painful memories that I was then able to really face going back to New York, because it had been the scene of rather too much unpleasantness as far as I was concerned, all incidentally related to my ex-husband, no one else. So, but anyway, so that's Studio 54.
Okay, thank you.
Next question.
So, several people have asked if you knew Jeffrey Epstein and or Ghislaine Maxwell, and can you explain what you were trying to say on Good Morning Britain's show before Piers Morgan shouted you down?
Oh, well, that's sort of several questions in one, isn't it?
Yes.
Okay, first thing let's take it last first.
Okay.
Because since, let's do it chronologically.
Mm-hmm.
I was invited onto I think it's called Good Morning Britain. Yeah, because I can't ever remember which is which. I was asked on Good Morning Britain solely to give my opinion on Prince Andrew's interview with Emily Maitlis, which I did. I said then, and I will say now, I thought he was heartfelt and basically really ill-advised and stupid to give the interview. When I was on the show, it turned out that it was a much wider scenario than I had been led to believe it was. And they actually had to beg me to go on it because I didn't want to go on it. And I did it because I'd been on the show before and I had respect for Piers and I had respect for the show. As I wrote and told Sir Peter Bazalgette and Dame Caroline McCall, I was absolutely horrified by the way I was treated and by the way I was ambushed and really by the way I was set up, and that each of the people involved in the show was a complete disgrace. Because I was saying, which was the absolute truth, that Jeffrey Epstein had cut an outrageous sweetheart deal with the Palm Beach authorities, and that they had actually colluded with him in covering up his crimes, which there's no doubt about. I was able to go on the Eamon Holmes show on radio and get the point across, because it's a very important point. That had the Florida authorities not colluded and really sold out the justice system, and sold out all of the victims of Jeffrey Epstein, people would have known many years before what he was really up to. But because of this extraordinary sweetheart deal, and you can depend on it, there were reasons, practical reasons for why it happened. I'm not going to cast any more stones than that, but it's sort of obvious to anybody who knows how the world works that this should not have happened, but it did happen. That meant that Jeffrey Epstein was given a fig leaf to pose as somebody who was not as atrocious as he was. That's the first thing I was trying to say. The second thing I was trying to say was that amidst all of the perfectly just accusations used against Jeffrey Epstein is the misuse of the term paedophile Paedophilia is a medical expression which refers particularly and solely to interference with a prepubescent minor. Jeffrey Epstein was, correctly speaking, not a paedophile. He was an ephebophile, which again is another term for people who interfere with post-pubescent minors. Now, there is a distinction, and there is a valid distinction, and I'm not going to apologize for being more knowledgeable than ignoramuses, and I'm not going to for 1 second say that I have anything to apologize for, because people are too goddamn ignorant to know what the facts are and are busy trying to hurl abuse at me because I was making a proper distinction. I mean, if you died because your head was cut off, I'd be a fine fool to go around saying you died because your foot was cut off. The two things are, you died of an injury, and each was equally fatal, but the fact of the matter is your head isn't your foot, and it couldn't be simpler. But of course, we live in a world where so many people have no interest whatsoever in being precise or in being knowledgeable. They simply want to fulminate from the orifice upon which I am sitting. And I'm afraid I do not go along with that. So that was the point I was trying to make, that he was not a paedophile, he was an ephebophile. Well, of course, Pears shouted me down and said that interference with a 14-year-old is paedophilia. Well, it's not. Most 14-year-olds have been through puberty, and it is ephebophilia. They are both criminal offences. They are both moral offences, but they are not the same offence. And I don't care how loudly anybody screams. They only need to scream their way to a dictionary or to a medical encyclopedia, and they can see what the difference is. And I, of course, came in for a lot of abuse, trying to say that I was somehow excusing Jeffrey Epstein, which I certainly wasn't, and I made the point. And to give Pears his due, he did back me up on the fact that I had made the point that I was not excusing Jeffrey Epstein. But people do not have a right to be outraged because you're more knowledgeable than they are. You have a right to be outraged that you are being abused for saying something that is accurate. Anyway, so that was that. I have never met Jeffrey Epstein. I have known of Jeffrey Epstein since the early 80s, when one of my son's godmothers, who's one of my oldest and dearest friends, had the grave misfortune of subletting her Belgravia apartment to Jeffrey Epstein. And he tried to steal it from under her.
Oh.
So since then, the name Jeffrey Epstein has been absolute mud in our circle. Because we by then knew that Jeffrey Epstein was the lowest of the low financially. I have to tell you, I think President Clinton and several of the other men whose names have been roped into this have a point. They say they knew nothing about Jeffrey Epstein's activities. I gather even his chauffeur is now saying he knew nothing about his activities. And you know what activities I'm referring to.
Yes.
And certainly had it been general knowledge, his crookery was general knowledge, but his perversion sexually was not. Had we known about it, I can tell you, we would have all broadcasted from the mountain top. So the fact that none of us knew about it, and although I was careful to never be in the same room as him, I know that other people, funnily enough, the very friend I'm speaking about, kept on running into him and at various parties in New York and Paris, etc. And as soon as he walked into the room, she bolted. And she didn't know about it either. None of us knew about it, because if she'd known, I'd have known. Yes. So nobody knew. It was a deep, dark secret. Ghislaine Maxwell, I have never met. I don't think. I qualified because I used to see her mother at Hetty Simpson's parties. Her mother, Elizabeth, was an absolutely charming French woman. And she was a friend of Hetty Simpson, Mrs. Leonard Simpson, whose husband had owned Simpson's Piccadilly, and whose daughter Georgina is married to the movie star Anthony Andrews, and who's actually one of Princess Anne's best friends. They're great, great friends with Princess Anne. And so that's the caliber of person that her mother mixed with. I have met one or two of the children at Hetty's parties glancingly, but I really wouldn't remember which ones they were, and if it was her, I don't remember. As for Robert Maxwell, even though I didn't know him, I didn't like him, because I had a dancing partner called Mike Gill, who used to be something high up in the Mirror Group when Robert Maxwell owned it. And on one occasion, Mike phoned me at about 7:15 to say, "Oh, Georgie, I'm so sorry. I'm not going to be able to make the ball this evening because Robert Maxwell has pulled one of his stunts." He was notorious for pulling stunts and forcing his senior staff to stay behind so he'd screw up their times. And that meant that I didn't like Robert Maxwell thereafter. But he had an affair with a friend of mine called Wendy Lee, who was actually a very well-known writer, very highly regarded as a writer. She very popular, not only books, but journalist. She was a personal friend of mine. She was a cousin of the Freuds, Sigmund Freud, and all of the other Freuds. Yes. I used to go to her parties, and I used to see various members of the Freud family there. She was a very great character, and she had an affair with Robert Maxwell because Wendy loved, what shall we say, sensual experiences. And Robert Maxwell, she evidently thought, was a very good sensualist. But that was fine. Wendy could do what she wanted. That's the full extent of my knowledge of Epstein
and
Ghislaine Maxwell.
But Ghislaine, what she was? I mean, what's her profession? What she was?
I know nothing about her, and I don't want to get involved with it. And I think we need to remember that we live in a world where everybody is innocent until they are proven guilty of a criminal charge. I think people have to be particularly unscrupulous and amoral to see somebody who is charged with serious crimes and they are going to somehow jump on a bandwagon to bury them before the legal process has a right to do it with justice or not at all. And I'm awfully sorry. I have led my life, my whole life, by being correct and having scruples, and I do not intend to start at this stage of it, at the tail end of it, jumping on bandwagons and having mob rule prevail. We live in a civilized society. The woman has been charged with very serious crimes. I know nothing about her. I don't intend to get involved with any of this in any way, shape, or form. It's nothing to do with me, and I will not be getting involved with it beyond the limited way that I was dragged into it by Good Morning Britain and Piers Morgan, because but for that, I wouldn't be commenting even now. But I know that it's in my interest to right the wrong where people think that, every now and then some idiot posts a comment saying that I was excusing paedophilia. Jerks, idiots, imbeciles, and creeps. I have never, ever excused paedophilia, and I don't excuse your ignorance in thinking that I did. I have never excused paedophilia, nor have I ever excused ephebophilia, nor have I excused hebophilia, which is the condition between pre and post-pubescent wrongdoing with minors. While we're on the topic of the correct use of the language and the correct use of words, I think I ought to make the point here, which I tried to make on Good Morning Britain, that there is actually a distinction between a minor, which is anybody under the age of consent, and the word child. The Common or Garden Oxford Dictionary definition of child is a minor of either sex which is prepubescent. This has been slightly complicated recently by the United Nations decreeing that any minor is a child. Well, the United Nations is made up of many different countries, none of which speak English at all, or very slightly. And they have hijacked the meaning of the word child and confused it with the word minor, for whatever reason is beside the point. I'm not casting stones one way or the other beyond saying that they have extended the meaning of the word child into a meaning it does not ordinarily possess amongst well-educated English-speaking people, because a child is someone up to the age of puberty. Then they are teenagers, because teenage usually coincides with the end of childhood and the beginning of sexual maturity, and then you reach the age of majority. These are definitions that have always existed. I was actually quite surprised to discover that the United Nations had hijacked the word child and made it into something that it is not and confused it with minor. But I get where they're coming from because they don't speak English, most of them. Mm-hmm. Nevertheless, one needs to stick to the distinctions, because I'm pretty damn sure if you say to a 14-year-old you're a child, they're going to eat your head off. And also, I'm pretty damn sure that if you're dealing with a 7 or 8-year-old child, you would be deluded to say it's a teenager. And to show you the difference between Jeffrey Epstein's crimes and a case of paedophilia, some years ago, there was an awful scandal involving the Duchess of Medinaceli and her second son, the Duke of Feria, who became completely gaga with drugs, blew his mind, and started to interfere with babies and young children. And it so happens that my children's godfather, or one of them, is a Spanish count who's an heir to one of the grandee dukedoms of Spain. And of course, the Spanish aristocracy all know each other. Well, everybody was up in arms about it, and I will not mention the name of the wife because, poor thing, she was completely innocent and completely horrified. Well, the king immediately stepped in and stripped him of the title. And he was tried, and I remember saying to Manuel, I said, you know, I do hope that he's going to do the honourable thing and fall on his sword, you know, which really, there's absolutely no excuse or explanation that could justify conduct like that.
Yeah.
You're caught, do the decent thing, commit suicide immediately, preferably turning over your personal fortune to your victims' families before you do so, and then commit suicide. There's nothing else is valuable. I'm sorry, and everybody was actually trying to convince him to commit suicide. He didn't commit suicide until after he was tried and found guilty. And he then committed suicide, by which time it was too late because he had shown himself not only to be a complete pervert of the most dreadful order, but to not even have the understanding or the comprehension or the decency to do the decent thing at the 99th hour. Now that was real paedophilia. Epstein was ephebophilia. And both of them are wrong, and both of them are terrible, but I am afraid that I am old enough and Catholic enough to have no apologies for saying that I think that paedophiles who tamper with infants and young children are worse than ephebophiles who tamper with post-pubescent minors. They're both terrible, but I am afraid I have no apology for thinking that one is worse than the other. And people who don't see that, I'm afraid they are entitled to their opinion, and I'm entitled to mine. I'm not trying to convert them to my opinion, and they're certainly not going to convert me to theirs. And just as how I have respect for their opinion, I demand that they have respect for mine. Right. It's as simple as that. This is my absolute final word on the subject, and hopefully hereafter, all those brain-dead ignoramuses who have been beating their chest and trying to make out that I was somehow excusing paedophilia when I certainly wasn't. And not only was I not doing it, but anybody who looks at the show can see that I was particular to say that I was not doing it. And so they have very selectively chosen to indulge their outrage at my expense and the expense of truth and fair play. And that is the end of my comments on Epstein, Maxwell, and the whole lot of them. Thank you so much. And let's wrap this one up.
Well, thank you for your comments and observation and everything and answer on the questions today. Well, write your questions in comments, and we will speak again soon.
And anybody who has a comment on paedophilia and says they disagree with me, don't waste your time writing it. I'm going to get it struck out. So don't even waste your time writing it, because I'm awfully sorry. I'm not going to allow ignoramuses to rewrite the medical dictionary or the English language, or in fact the Greek language, because it comes from Greek. It's the marriage of two Greek words to justify your prejudices and your stupidity. So save your time.
Well, yes. Okay. Thank you very much.
My pleasure.
Thank you. See you very soon. Goodbye.
Pleasure is the wrong word, but still.
Well, goodbye.
Thank you and goodbye.